Isn't it interesting how celebrations so often give it some time and all of a sudden celebration starts to dwindle? And the things that we celebrate, the things that we get really, really excited about, they stop being so exciting and we stop celebrating things after a little while. Like someone's 13th birthday, when they become a teenager, or someone's 16th birthday when they can start driving, that is so much more exciting, and we celebrate that so much more than someone's 57th birthday. That doesn't mean as much. And have you noticed this with relationships? When people first start dating, they know how many days they've dated, or maybe they count the months. Have you seen on Facebook or on Instagram, people count their month-versaries? It's cute, I guess, but when you're you're married for 25 years, I don't even know how many months that is. Is anybody in here married for 173 months? Nobody counts that. I don't know what that is. For some reason, over time, the things that we initially get so excited about, the things that we initially celebrate, they start to kind of die off. They stop being so exciting. We have this awesome member of our team here on staff at CEFC. Her name is Lisa White. She's our financial secretary. Yeah, she's amazing. She is awesome. She's right there, sitting right there. And so Lisa, I remember the first staff meeting she was ever a part of. She came in and she said, "Guys, I have some very exciting news for you. I brought lunch for you." And so of course we were like, "Lisa, we weren't sure if you were going to stick around, but now you're on the team for sure, for sure." So she had this home-cooked meal, crock pots, hot food. And so right after staff meeting, we all gathered around and we were eating it. And we were like, "Lisa, thank you so much." And then the second week, she came in and she said, "Guys, I have food again for you." And we were like, "Lisa, what are you doing? This is amazing." Lisa is an incredible cook. She makes great food. And we were all like, "Thank you so much, Lisa. This is great. We could really get used to this." But see, of course, we did get used to it. She celebrated her birthday just a little bit recently, a couple weeks ago. And she came in and we said, "Lisa, happy birthday. Thank you so much. We're so happy that you're here. And we're so happy for you. Happy birthday. What did you make for lunch for us today?" But isn't that interesting? I don't know what that is about me, or maybe that's the same for you, but the things that we get excited about, the things that we celebrate, for some reason, that energy and that excitement just runs out over time. And it's not just with stuff like that, because it's also things that we want to celebrate, things that we want to be excited for, those relationships in our lives that we really care about, or those people in our lives, or those moments that we really care about. But for some reason, sometimes that energy and that excitement can just kind of dwindle and not be there anymore. And for those of you in the room or watching online who really care about your relationship with Jesus, who you say, "I'm going to follow Jesus, I want to make Jesus a part of my life," for us, things about God and moments where God interacts with us and or Jesus impacts our heart, sometimes those moments can feel the same way. And sometimes for me, I'm sure it is for some of you in the room as well, for me, it's just I want to keep that excitement, and I don't know how to keep that excitement. I don't know how to keep celebrating. And I'm not content with that. And so this morning, I just want to take a little bit of time and kind of look at my own heart and ask you to look at your own heart and say, is there something in us that can change, something that we can change to celebrate more and to just not let that run out, especially on those things and those moments and those people that we really think that is something that's worth celebrating. So we're going to look at an interaction that Jesus had with some people and the way that they reacted to him. We have this recording of the stories and life of Jesus written by a guy named Luke. So Luke was a doctor. He was very meticulous. He cared so much about writing details. And so what he did is he went around to people who interacted with Jesus, who saw him, who walked with him, who talked with him, and he made a really detailed recording of it. And we have it in the book of Luke in the Bible. And so he's a doctor. He has very, very meticulous detail, and he records this story for us. It says, "On the way to Jerusalem, he, Jesus, was passing along between Samaria and Galilee." And so this is just a testament to this. Luke really, this is a real place, right? Luke is talking to somebody, and they're saying, "Let me tell you when this happened. I'm pretty sure we were somewhere between Samaria and Galilee. Jesus was on this long journey, and this is where this story happened." And here's what it says. "And as he entered a village, he was met by 10 lepers who stood at a distance." So Jesus is on this journey, and he gets to this village, and 10 lepers are standing there waiting for him. Now, people with leprosy, in this culture, it was a big deal. So leprosy is a skin disease where you would have boils grow on your skin. Sometimes it would grow on your face, and it was really, really, really dangerous because your skin and your body would start to die, and pieces of you could fall off, you could lose your nose or a limb. And obviously, they didn't have any medicine at this time, so there was no cure for it. And while they didn't have an understanding of germs in this culture, like what they did have was cultural rules and cultural guidelines that set up how they could interact. So for someone that was a leper, for someone that had leprosy in this culture, in the Jewish culture, they had these things. And it's recorded in Leviticus, so this is just like a group of those rules, a group of those codes by which people had to live. So when anyone has a spot on their skin that may be a defiling skin disease, they must be brought to a priest. So this is really interesting, right? Because there's a bunch of things listed after this that it says, but you have to go to a priest, and the priest says if you do or don't have this disease. If you do have it, there's a bunch of things that have to happen. You have to cover your face. You have to wear like ashes on your head to make sure that everybody knows that you have this disease. So you can't cover it up. You can't pretend like it's not happening. You're not allowed to be near people. So your family and your friends and people that are close to you, you have to be cut off from them and separate from them. You weren't even allowed to live inside of like the city wall or inside of the village where you were at. You had to be completely distant and separated. You couldn't work. So you just had to walk around aimlessly begging. And there's this other thing that's really interesting in their culture. So at the end of all this list of things that it says this, that he, the priest, shall pronounce them ceremonially unclean. So for people with leprosy in this culture, not only did it affect your relationships, not only did it affect your standing in the community and your ability to interact with people in your community, but this phrase, ceremonially unclean, means that for someone who had leprosy, you were cut off from God. You could not interact with God in the temple. So their worship, their very like physical relationship with God and their spiritual and emotional relationship with God was cut off. So when Jesus approaches this village and there's 10 lepers that are meeting him, what's so interesting is that they're standing at a distance because they know they can't go close to Jesus. And they're in this mindset and this headspace where they are completely cut off from their family and loved ones and community. And it says after this, they lifted up their voices saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." So these weren't just 10 men who were standing at the front of a village because they didn't have anything else to do. They weren't just standing there. They were ready because they knew that Jesus was on his way. And this is so cool because Jesus, they knew, and it's actually recorded for us as well in Luke, they knew that he was someone who had interacted with lepers before. Because Jesus, while he walked around on this earth, he did so many interesting things. He said so many things that turn the world upside down on its head, the things that we believe and celebrate and sing songs about and gather together about. But something else that he did was heal people. Jesus would go, and because he was God as a person, he would heal people of their diseases. And we have one recording of this, and I'm sure that this story is in their minds as they're standing there at this village entrance waiting for Jesus. So earlier in the book of Luke, we have this story where Jesus interacts with another person with leprosy. It says, while Jesus was in one of the towns, a man came along who was covered with leprosy. When he saw Jesus, he fell with his face to the ground and begged him, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him. So this is this beautiful account, this beautiful story of this man who has leprosy, but when he sees Jesus, he runs up to Jesus, which you are not allowed to do. It's written out in the code of the culture. You are not allowed to do that. So Jesus has every right to say, you cannot be close to me because if you give me leprosy, I'm going to be cut off from everyone. So there's the cultural part, but Jesus also knows I'm going to be cut off from God. You're breaking God's law right now. So Jesus has every right in this moment to turn this man away and say, your mess, your sin, this thing that you have going on is too much for me. But the heart of Jesus, over and over and over again, in the recordings that Luke gives us and in the recordings that we have from his other followers, is that Jesus does not want to be far off from people who are broken and who are messy and who are hurting. So I just want to say this before we even go on with anything else. If you are here in this room right now, or if you're watching online and you feel far away from your friends, or your family, or your community, or if you feel far from God, you don't have to feel like Jesus doesn't want anything to do with you. Because look at Jesus' reaction. He reached out his hand and he touched the man. So not only did he not run from him, but he went closer to him. And in that place where Jesus had no fear or problem getting messy with this man, he healed him. He said, "Be clean," and immediately the leprosy left him. So this is the Jesus that we see recorded in Luke. And not only that, but after that, Jesus said, he ordered him, "Don't tell anyone." And yet, the news about him spread all the more, so that the crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. So Jesus tells this guy, "Don't tell anyone that I did this." But of course, he told somebody because these 10 men are waiting for him. They know what's going to happen. And so these men that we see, it's as he entered the village, he was met. They're there. They're at the front of the village saying, "Jesus is on his way." Maybe the only person in the whole surrounding area that I can interact with without being turned away, that I can go to with knowing that I might get healed, this person is on his way. And so what they did is they expected Jesus. And I wonder if that's not something that we can learn from these men, to expect Jesus. Because there's story after story after story, not only recorded in the Bible, but recorded in this community of God showing up, of Jesus meeting us in the middle of our brokenness, in the middle of our mess. And what would it look like for us to expect Jesus? We all have expectations, and it's really funny how expectations impact the way that we live. I remember, does anyone remember the Book It thing when you were in school? It was like Pizza Hut, which I feel like there's no Pizza Huts anymore. I'm not sure how that happened. But Pizza Hut was like, we want kids to read books. And so they would like give you a free personal pizza if you read a certain amount of books. So I remember one day very vividly in elementary school when I was, both my parents taught at the school that I was at. So once the bell rang, I went and found myself a little corner and I was trying to read as many books as I possibly could because that afternoon we were going to Pizza Hut for dinner. So I wanted to make sure that I got myself my personal pan pizza. And I was reading, I got through a book. I was like, write it down, put it on the thing. And then the janitor for the school comes over to me and says, "Hey, what are you still doing here?" And I look up and I'm like, "Well, you see there's this personal pan pizza thing. I'm trying to get it, whatever. And the janitor's like, "No, you don't understand. It's 5 o'clock. Like, why are you still here?" And I said, "Oh, my parents are probably around somewhere. They're just talking to somebody." Now, the thing is, my parents had gone in 2 cars to Pizza Hut that day. So my mom had this expectation that my dad was going to drive me, and my dad had this expectation that my mom was going to drive me. And of course, I was there reading my book, expecting that my parents were going to drive me to Pizza Hut. It's so interesting. It worked out fine. They came and picked me up. It was fine. It was whatever. And I did get my pizza, so that's a good thing. But it's so interesting because expectations impact the way that we act. So my actions are directly impacted by the things that I expect. And to expect Jesus should change the way that I live, should change the way that I act. Something that really frustrates me, if I'm honest, is that I don't have a faith like this. I don't have a faith that expects Jesus. A lot of times I'm talking to people about things that are going on in my life, or I'm talking about things that are really affecting me, to people that have a whole lot more faith than I do, and a lot of times their response can be something like, "I'm sure God will come through for you," or "I'm sure God's going to show up in this big way." And if I'm honest, a lot of times that just annoys me because I don't live out of that. I don't live out of this expectation for Jesus. But for these men, and perhaps for you and for me this morning, knowing the stories and knowing the things that Jesus has done should change our expectations. Because Jesus is a God who shows up. The same way that he showed up for these men, he can show up for us. And so I wonder what that would look like for us. And as we continue, it says, when he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." So these men are there standing at a distance. They didn't run up to Jesus, but they know that he can heal them. And Jesus' response is, "Go and show yourselves to the priest." Now, this meant a ton to them in their culture. They had every idea what he was talking about. And that's because in the code laid out for what you do when you have leprosy, there is this like long list of how to be restored back in. If you become healed, there's this long list of things. You have to do a sacrifice. You have to clean yourself a certain way. You have to get different clothes, et cetera, et cetera. All these things to be back in to your community and to be gone from this ceremonially unclean thing. But if we look at the beginning of what it says in this code, it says the priest is to go outside and examine them. When somebody with leprosy comes to them, the priest is to go outside the camp and examine them. And if they've been healed of their defiling skin disease, and then it lists all this stuff, right? But this phrase is so crucial, if they have been healed. See, because these men know that for them to be restored to their community, for them to be restored, for them to be back with the people that they love, for them to get back to life, not plagued by this disease, they need healing first. And so when Jesus says to them, go and show yourselves to the priests, they have to understand that. And if we just go back to that slide for a second, when Jesus says to them, go and show yourselves to the priest, there's not even a sentence in there that says what they did. It says, go and show yourselves to the priests, and as they went, they were cleansed. If I was writing this, I would have to put a sentence in there that says, they turned around and they went. Or they started the journey towards the priest, but they weren't sure if they were actually going to be healed. Or they went on their way, but they were starting to doubt the things that Jesus did. They were starting to doubt this because this story is not like the story of Jesus earlier. This is so different, but that's not what they did. It says, as they went, they were cleansed. So for these men, not only were they expecting Jesus, but they trusted Jesus. When Jesus said, do this thing, they did it immediately. And as they went, as they did this thing because they trusted Jesus, they were cleansed. And so I wonder what it looks like for us this morning to trust Jesus. I wonder if there's something that you know, something that you've heard or that you just have this nagging in your heart that you know God wants you to do, that you know Jesus is calling you to do, or maybe something that he's calling you to stop doing and say, this is enough. I'm not going to be a part of this anymore. And I wonder if some of us are just too filled with doubt or worry, or too preoccupied with the rest of the things that we have going on to just say, Jesus, I trust you, and I'm going to do this. And I don't know for sure, but maybe if there's something that you're expecting of Jesus, maybe if there's something where you're like, Jesus, could you please show up? Could you please show me what I'm supposed to do here? Could you please make this big miracle, this healing, or whatever it is happen in my life? I wonder if the next step for us this morning is to say that we trust Jesus in that. Because for these 10 men, as they went, they were cleansed. It was as they went that they were cleansed. So the healing for them didn't happen until they were going. And I want to be really clear about this because I've heard this said wrong so many times when I've sat in churches or when I've listened to people preach. And I don't want to say this because I don't want this to come across whatsoever. There's nothing in God that needs us to do something or that needs us to be a certain way in order for him to love us. Jesus' heart is for you, he loves you, and he is not waiting for you to fix yourself before he can love you, before he can reach out to you. That's not something that he requires. But sometimes we get in our own way. And sometimes there's things that we're not ready to trust Jesus in. And so the thing that we're asking from him, the thing that we're asking him to make happen in our lives, that thing is standing in our way. And I wonder, if we trust Jesus, will we see that healing? Will we see him work and move? And I wonder, I don't know. But for these men, they did. They trusted Jesus, and they were cleansed. That could have been the end of the story here. Jesus does another miracle, and we move on. Maybe they tell a ton more people, and more people hear about Jesus. But there's one more thing that happens in this story. We continue. It says, then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice, and he fell on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks. Now he was a Samaritan. Before we even go on with the rest of this, I just want to say this sentence here at the end, now he was a Samaritan, this is super awesome. I could spend like a whole Sunday just talking about this thing, but this guy that we're about to talk about that turns back and thanks Jesus, he's a Samaritan, and it says that in the account, so I want to make sure that I talk about it. But Samaritans and Jewish people, like this culture that they're in, and the Samaritans are at odds. And so for Jesus doing this with these people here, for Luke to write this story down and to write, now he was a Samaritan, is just one more example that not only is Jesus interacting with people who are sick, who are outcast from society, but even Samaritans who for the religious people, who for people that they were trying to follow God, they couldn't interact with Samaritans. And this is just one more example of Jesus saying, no, if you're far from me, if you're distant from me, I want you here. Nothing is going to stop me from loving you. And it's just such a beautiful thing. I wish I had more time to talk about it. But let's just go back. Jesus, let's just read that one more time. Sorry, my bad. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice, and he fell on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks. So this man, he sees that he's healed. He looks down and he notices that his skin is healed. And instead of going to the priest, instead of just keep moving in the direction that he was already moving, he turns back. And this is so interesting because the other 9 men don't do that. The other 9 men know that for them to get back into their community, for them to be restored both to their family and God, they need to go and be seen by the priest so they can start this process. But for this man, it was too important that he do one more thing. And Jesus responds to him, he answered, "We're not 10 cleansed. Where are the 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" And he said to him, "Rise and go your way. Your faith has made you well." So this man comes back and he approaches Jesus. And for me, I've heard this story so many times in Sunday school. Like this is one of those ones that we tell in kids ministry to make sure that kids know how much Jesus loves them. But I don't know if you've ever heard this story this way, if you've grown up in church for a long time. But I always thought that this was like Jesus seeing that this man came back and that 9 guys didn't come back. And he was like upset and frustrated. Kind of like, when your mom says to you, your grandma gave you this really nice gift. You need to write her a thank you letter, right? I kind of got the impression as a kid that Jesus was frustrated because 9 guys didn't say thank you to him. And I just don't think that's consistent with the heart of Jesus. I don't think that Jesus is angry at 9 men for not thanking him. I think that Jesus is trying to point out that for this guy, for this man, for this Samaritan that came back and said thank you, there is something so much more for him than the other 9 got. And I noticed this when I was reading it. It says, let's just read it one more time. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, he turned back, praising God with a loud voice, and he fell on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks. What this man did was he praised God and he gave him thanks. He said, this thing that's happened to me, I can't be quiet about this. I need to say, Jesus, thank you. I need to say, when somebody asks me what happened, I need to say, listen, Jesus showed up in my life and he did something incredible. You need to spend time thanking God. And that's something that we need to do. That's something for sure that we need to do, that we need to be a part of. That when God shows up in our lives, we need to be able to say, let me tell you about the God that did this. Let me tell you about the way that Jesus impacted my life. Let me spend time saying, God, thank you. When we sing these songs, when we pray to him, and when we say, Jesus, thank you for the way that you have shown up. It's so important. But for this guy, it's not only what he did. See, because praising God and giving him thanks were the actions that this man did, but he also took himself to a place. He took himself to a person. He turned back and he went to Jesus' feet. Because I think the one thing more than anything that should happen when we're impacted by Jesus, when Jesus shows up in our lives, is that it should make us draw near to Jesus. That for us, our response when he shows up, when we're expecting him to show up, and when we trust him and we do something and we see him move, that should draw us closer to Jesus. For 9 of these men, Jesus impacted their life. And I imagine, I don't know, but I imagine they went back to the priest and they went through all the ritual, and Jesus' healing stayed with them and they went back to their lives. But they missed something. They missed the one who had healed them. And I just want to encourage you and encourage me this morning that we should not miss that. We should not let the moments where Jesus shows up in our lives just happen and then we move on from them. Too often those things happen and we might celebrate them for a moment, but then we just keep going because life is so busy and there's so much to do. But what would it look like if that made us draw near to Jesus? Because look at Jesus' response. It says, then Jesus answered, were not 10 cleansed? Where are the 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? And he said to him, rise and go your way. Your faith has made you well. Jesus celebrates the faith of this man. And he says, that is what has made you well. That more than anything is something that we can replicate. So I just wonder for you and for me this morning, what is it that we need to do? What's our next step that we can take closer to Jesus? Is that we can expect him, that we can expect Jesus and say, Jesus, I want you to show up. And more than just this feeling that I have, I'm going to live expecting you to show up. Or is it that in the midst of that expectation that we say, Jesus, I trust you. I trust Jesus. And that thing that I know that I need to change, that thing that I know that I need to do or stop doing, I'm going to say, you know what? I don't know if that's what's stopping you from healing me. I don't know if that's what's stopping you from showing up, but I'm going to trust you anyway in the midst of that. Or maybe for you, you have moments like this where you care about following Jesus and you care about your relationship with him so much. And it's simply, your next step this morning simply is to draw near to Jesus. To let him hold you, to spend time in his presence and to say, you are the reason that I live, the reason that I'm healed, and the reason that I can go forward. Because Jesus doesn't want us to not move forward with life. Like he was happy for those 9 guys to keep living. But we miss something if we don't stop and draw near to him in the midst of that. Let's pray together. Jesus, thank you that you are near to us, that you don't stay far off. That in our brokenness and our hurt, in our pain and our mess, you run towards us, you reach out, you hold us. And thank you that in the midst of all of our selfishness and all of our sin, that we can expect you to show up. Give us the strength to trust you in the things that you're calling us to. And we want to draw near to you. We want to be close to you. You are the best thing for us. And we can't help but respond by being close to you. We thank you.